I call this the captured heart. The dark heart is captured within the other two hearts, which are all done out of one piece of wood. The inner heart won't come out even though it's free, and the outer heart goes around from the inside to the outside and captures the inner heart. This was a whittling contest, and I had to start with a 3x3 block. I just had an idea and I drew it out really rough. I roughed it out on the bandsaw real quick, and then I put in some guidelines for the holes that I wanted to drill across the ends. Right there is the guidelines. I just measured in and drew the lines. On the inside, I wanted to cut it out, so I marked that out. And then I wanted 3 separate divisions, so I freehanded that in. Those are stop cuts right there. Now I'm going to refine where I want to scroll saw it for the divisions. You can't come up around the corners because you got to curve the line. This mark is to drill. The mark on the top is where the hole is going to go, and the mark along the side is so I can find the center. You can see that I'm going to center it, and it goes parallel to the ends. These holes are to start my scroll saw because I want to come down each side with the scroll saw, and you have to feed it through those little holes. The board I'm working on the scroll saw is clamped down, and I put it in there just so I could use some sharp blade up on the top. I'd already cut a lot of 3/4, so I wanted some sharp blade to finish up this. That's just a trick that I use to make my blades last longer. It works pretty good. Now that I got the slots cut to help me separate those beads, I'm going to cut out the center. You don't need any of that wood that's in the center, so we'll just get rid of it. And this is what it looks like after the scroll saw work. The heart's out of the center, and I have just those short lines on the sides. Now I'm going to mark the sides where I'm going to carve it. You can notice that I'm carving and using the hole as part of it. The hole is going to help me go around those corners to drop from the top to the bottom. Notice I used a heavy line for my stop cut that wanted to make it so it was easy to tell where to stop, and I just carved an angle from the top surface down to the bottom of the hole. I'm going to do this on all 3 of these sides, and then after I get this side all done, I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. I'll put my stop cut in and use that for a guide and carve it back down just like on the other side. This part of the carving is the easy part. You really can't break it, but you got to get it all blocked out. And then when you start carving everything loose and rounding those little threads out, then it gets kind of weak and you run a risk of breaking it. Most of this video is pretty well sped up. I had to do that in order to get it short enough to put on the YouTube. This is all done real time, and it shows how I just carve it down using a knife that would carve the whole section at once. You can still see the scroll saw cuts, and then I'm going to have to cut them by hand right around there and get them to drop from the top to the bottom. That's the hard part. The rest of it's pretty simple. I did use the scroll saw holding the piece up on an angle. I was a little worried that I was going to get a catch and ruin the whole thing, but it helped out. Scored those lines in so then I can hand cut them the rest of the way through. This is where I'm rounding everything off, and then I'll go back onto those corners and I'll have to cut it through with a knife and get everything loose. The outer and the inner will be all one piece of wood, and the center heart will come loose later on. This is where you have to be really careful when you're coming down through. There's a lot of cross grain right in there. I got it all loose with a bench knife, and then I rounded everything off with the bench knife. Here I stuck a pencil through it to separate everything, and I'm using a little power carver with a ruby bit to kind of sand everything up smooth. Some of those corners around came out pretty rough, so I wanted to smooth it all up. It'll help keep things strong. Sometimes I'll use super glue on my cross grain if I'm worried about it breaking. A lot of the chains and stuff, I do that. But on this, I just kind of left it. I clear lacquered the whole thing after I painted the center heart with a watercolor. It just made it brown so it would show different. It's all one piece of wood, but I wanted people to know that the center part was loose and the outside and the inside was holding it captive. After I finished painting the inner heart with watercolor, I kind of took a knife and I carved off little spots where I got it onto the outer part, and a little sandpaper cleaned it up. You get it on, and you got to carve it off. After I got it all cleaned up and sanded really well, I did use some lacquer sanding sealer, sanded it out again, and then clear lacquer 3 coats. Turned out pretty nice. If you roll your sandpaper into a little cone like you see here, it's easy to get into the little nooks and little crannies, and it works quite well. And you can roll it in different directions and keep it fresh. You might notice that I have several bench knives out. I do that mostly to keep a sharp knife on hand. If one gets dull, I can switch to another.